here. I have the question answer box open, so feel free to type in your questions into the question answer box, and I will periodically look at it. And if I forget completely, then for sure I will I will take a look at the end of the presentation for a question answer session. So I'm Joseph Spear. I have a architecture firm in Redondo Beach. There are 9 of us currently, and we specialize in high-end custom single-family residential architecture. We also do multifamily and commercial architecture, which constitutes about, I would say, 30% of our work, but mostly we are high-end custom single-family. Today, what I want to talk to you guys about is pre-design. So pre-design is a, it's basically a phase of architecture that occurs prior to any design taking place. It typically starts during escrow, and ideally it starts during the inspection contingency period, when we can do research and figure out whether we can or cannot do what it is that we're looking to do on a particular piece of property. So that's where you guys come in. There are some kind of important things that realtors need to keep in mind when selling a potential development property, right? Or something where somebody wants to do a remodel or addition in the future. Last thing that anyone wants is to purchase a piece of property and then find out, years later when it's time to actually do the addition, that you just simply can't do it. So, there's really two sides to pre-design. One is price analysis, which is the component that you guys can really assist with, and the second one is site analysis, and that's where we and other sub-consultants will come in to assist in to help you figure out what to do. So let's start with price analysis, right? So again, this is the one I'm sure you guys are familiar with. Your client says, I want to build a house, I want a piece of land, I want to make sure that I don't overbuild for the area, right? If you can imagine an area of Gardena and Torrance, if you put a house like this there, you would never get the value back from all of the dollars that you put in. So let's start with a bit of analysis. Imagine for a moment that you find a teardown, right? You find a $1.4 million land purchase, but does the build make sense? That's the question. So the best way to go about it is to, of course, look at comps in the area. Take a look at what else is available and selling for the price point that you ultimately think you either want to sell it for or you want to land at. So, imagine that you find a comp in the area for your $1.4 million teardown. You find a comp that, is 3,300 square feet that sold for $3.5 million. Construction, taking a look at, and this is where we can assist you in figuring out how much they actually spent per foot on that house in order to get it where it needed to be. Construction on this one appears to be about $400, maybe $450 per foot. Hard costs total for 3,300 square feet multiplied by 450 would come to around $1.5 million. Soft costs, meaning architect, all your engineers, any interior designers, anything that occurs prior to construction, might be around 120. Maybe you need to carry it for a while. Carrying cost might be 180. So the project looks like it's going to cost around $1.7 million for construction, hard and soft costs. So then you just do a very simple calculation to find out whether or not you're going to be making profit on your development. And in this particular case, it looks like you're going to be making a little under $500,000 in equity profit. Now, a lot of times people just don't want to lose value, right? They're willing, especially if it's for themselves and not for profit. You know, maybe they just want to hold the equity. So they want to make sure that whatever they put in makes it so that when they sell it, that their land plus build is going to be the same number. And some people are even willing to lose money on it temporarily because they know that 10 years from now, it's not going to matter what they spend on it. So it all just kind of depends on what people are looking for and how they are approaching it. Again, feel free to type in question answers, and I'll be looking here periodically. All right, so that's price analysis, right? So that's kind of the first piece that you start with always, because it's the easiest piece. It doesn't take a lot of research. It doesn't take a lot of consultants. It just takes kind of having a bit of knowledge of construction prices and some quick analysis. The site analysis, on the other hand, is a bit different. There's a lot to it, right? You know, there are a lot of different components to what can and can't be done, and what you may want to do in the future versus maybe some alternatives. So let's start with view analysis. So sometimes your view is panoramic, and sometimes you have a peekaboo view, and you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of that view. So this is a view from one of our projects that we are designing currently. And on that project in PVE, you know, one of the things, you know, if this is a site, imagine, you know, this is the upper portion of the lot and it slopes steeply down to the lower portion of the lot. Imagine that you want to kind of place a home on this lot. The most cost-effective place to put a house might be where there's some flat area, right? So you can see it's a little bit steeper over in this area. It's a little bit steeper down here below. It may make more sense to kind of place it in a flat area and also parallel to the sight lines, right? So essentially, you don't have to do a lot of excavation. You don't have to do a lot of cut and fill if you place it on a flat area. You know, and you kind of use the contours of the site. However, it may be that you're not getting the proper views from this area. So instead, what you have to do is you have to locate your home in an area where maybe it's going to cost a little bit more money, right? But you want to know prior to spending that money, how much is that going to be? So all of that has to be thought about, discussed. You know, do you want to take advantages of your view the best possible way, or is cost more of a factor? So things like that have to be thought about ahead of time. Not just your views, but you also have to, especially in areas like PVE or rolling hills or other areas with view ordinances, you have to take your neighboring views into account as well. So this is actually a view from a neighboring house for a house that we're trying to do over in this area here. And you can see our flags. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, but there are flags right over here. And you want to make sure that if you are going to be blocking any neighbor's view, that you are taking that into account. This happened to be, you know, situations like this are where neighbors will object, who say you're taking away my view, and you want to make sure you take that into account. That affects timing and overall cost of what your project is going to be, because, you know, the longer it takes, the more you're probably going to have to pay your architect and potentially carry your house, which can get expensive. All right, so then, you know, something else to consider when you're doing a site analysis is views versus traffic and noise, right? So imagine you have cars traveling down a road below, right below where you want to place your house. Maybe you don't want to look at them. Maybe this is something where you only want to purchase this property if you're going to be able to block the noise and the sight of these cars. So in order to do that, you may want to, you know, create a section Now this is a quick hand drafted schematic section, but we would do something that's more kind of hardline that would show the contours of the site and might say, you know what, if you really want this view, but you don't want the cars and the noise, maybe the simple solution to add is to add a, as tall of a wall as you can possibly have, and maybe some greenery in order to solve this problem. And that, with kind of those things combined, maybe that's the proper solution. So, I have a question. Maybe I missed it, but what are the costs for you to do a pre-design analysis? You did not miss it. So the costs vary, right? It depends on what it is that we are putting together. Is it, are we doing is this a flat lot in Torrance where we can simply kind of give our opinion and it makes perfect, makes perfect sense to have that amount of input, or are we instead putting together a full detailed package of analysis, right? So I would say the range is somewhere between $400 and $3,000, and it depends on what it is that we're doing. Again, if it's just kind of a site meeting, or if it's kind of discussion and thought that doesn't require anything more detailed, you might be on that less expensive end. If it turns out you need a complete analysis because you have an extremely complicated lot and complicated hopes and desires for the lot, then it might reach the other end of the spectrum as well. So each one kind of has to be analyzed on its own. All right, let's continue. Okay, so another thing to consider with the site, might be how do you frame your view, right? So this is a house that we did in Manhattan Beach on a little postage stamp size of a lot. The whole lot was significantly less than the ultimate square footage of the 3-story home, but we wanted to kind of create that view corridor and blend the interior and the exterior here. And so we want to know, are we going to have any issue with the power lines that happen to be here? So you can't see them because we kind of figured out exactly where our floor levels are going to be during the pre-design analysis. But there's actually a power pole over here, and the power line droops directly in line with the floor level right here. And so if we hadn't done that analysis ahead of time, we could have ended up with it, and it's literally right in front of this house. So we could have ended up with a power line that went straight through our opening if we didn't think about this stuff ahead of time. Okay, another question. Do you think COVID will lead to any design changes in the near, far future? Larger homes, more space to entertain, multiple home offices. What's so interesting is I would say up until COVID-19, the open floor plan was all anybody talked about. They want open, 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 open. I want indoor, outdoor. I want no privacy from kitchen to living to dining. It all needs to be open, open, open. Up until COVID-19, I had never really had someone approach us and say there just aren't enough walls in my house, right? It's always, let's get rid of that, tear that wall down, get rid of that wall. But since COVID-19, we've been asked for more partition spaces than we ever have before. People want their privacy. They want to escape. When people have their entire family in the house on lockdown for long periods of time, they want to be able to get away. So yes, more offices, I think, are going to be big. I think that you're going to have separate media rooms so that sound doesn't travel nearly as easily and as quickly. Soundproofing has been a big thing that people are asking me about right now, and how to treat walls in order to make it so that they're more soundproof. So things like that, I think, are becoming kind of more the norm. And then also a connection to the exterior, right? Because people don't want to feel cooped up in their house if they're spending a lot of time there. They want to have that connection to the outside and to nature, and being able to kind of you know, think about that ahead of time is a big deal. So, okay, we'll dismiss that one there. All right, so then we have protected trees. Okay, so this is a project that we had in the Palisades, where we essentially had these oaks, which were all over the site, right? And you're not allowed, this particular oak, you're not allowed to chop down, and you're also not allowed to go within a certain distance of the tree canopy, which is what's indicated with those dashed lines there. So imagine trying to put a house, you know, just kind of arrange it in a way that makes sense with these trees. So knowing the information ahead of time before you make the purchase that you're not going to be able to cut these trees down, or if you do cut the trees down, that it's get this, a 9-month process to apply to cut the trees down. If you know that ahead of time, you can plan for it, and you can have clients that have good expectations set and fewer surprises. So that's something else to consider during pre-design. All right, so then you have soils and site drainage, right? So, you know, imagine you have kind of a super, you know, hilly slope, right? Of course, you know, and let's say your home, you want to kind of place in the middle of that slope. You have to consider, of course, the surface water that's going to come down. You know, the drainage has to be thought about properly. You need to have you need to have proper French drain systems, or you're going to have this house start to kind of slide off the hill. But not only do you have to kind of plan for water that's on the surface, you also have to plan for water that's coming from underground. That creates hydrostatic pressure, which will also cause water infiltration. If you ever have a basement where you see the white kind of pasty stuff on the block wall in the basement, that's called efflorescence, and that's what occurs when you have just a little bit of hydrostatic pressure. When you have a lot, you can start to get mold. You can start to get get to a point where you don't even want to go down into the basement. And knowing what those conditions are ahead of time are kind of a big important thing to do. Another question is, where is bedrock? And the brown here indicates where bedrock might be underneath a house. And this can have a giant effect on the overall cost of your project, right? Is it going to be a $50,000 foundation, or is it going to be a $500,000 foundation or more? And I'll give you an example of what it can be later here. Because your bedrock might be a lot lower than you think, right? If your bedrock is way down where this is shown, then instead of being able to kind of put your house on a standard foundation, you may instead have to install caissons that go all the way down to bedrock and entrench themselves into bedrock. And I drew those caissons stopping at bedrock, but they actually have to embed in bedrock. And those can get very expensive very quickly. I've had projects where, during the pre-design phase, we figured out that the foundation was going to cost more than the house itself. And they ended up deciding not to move forward with that, and instead purchased a different piece of property that had a more modest potential construction cost. So this is the one I was going to tell you about. This is on Rocky Point in PVE. This is one of our projects there. It's actually we've just started framing. It actually looks very similar to the way it looks here in this picture. But what you can see here is this crane needed to lift these 120-foot long I-beams, these flanges, straight up into the air. I have a great video that I didn't include in this, but straight up into the air and then down into the earth to hold up this cliff. 120 feet, to give you an idea, is 12 stories of structure that is going underground to hold up this cliff to prevent it from sliding into the ocean. That can get very expensive. So this, again, we did pre-design prior. We knew exactly what we were getting into. Client said, I don't care. I want to go for it anyway. And he ended up putting $2 million straight into the ground. $2 million straight into the ground was what the cost of holding up this hill was. And yet, to hold up a one-story home, it's worth it, because what better views do you get than on this area of PVE here? All right, so height limits, right? So another thing is, what can and can't you do based on how tall you can go, right? And in certain areas, it's very straightforward and easy, and in other areas, like well, again, I'll mention PVE, right? In Palos Verdes Estates, it's more complicated. You have your rules, which limit, they set those upper limits, but then you have the planning commission, and all of your neighbors kind of help you decide how tall your house can ultimately be through objection. But height limit, right? So for example, you might have a height limit that follows the contours of the land, right? So in Hermosa Beach, this is the case. You can apply for what's called a convex slope analysis, and you actually can get you can actually make it so that your height limit is based on the contours of your slope, and that has basically one type of height limit. You have potentially one that just uses the four corners of the property, such as Manhattan Beach. They simply take the four corners of the property, and that becomes your height limit projected straight up into the air. And the question is how far are you going to have to cut into your soil in order to get the height that you're looking for? It might be based on the lowest natural grade of your site, in which case that may severely limit what you can and can't do on your lot. Or it could be based on the highest natural grade, and we don't have any of those around here, but that would be nice. All right, so another question I get is, during pre-design, I want a variance. My house is where it is, and it's kind of existing non-conforming. It's grandfathered in, and I want to be able to add it within my side yard setback. I know I'm not allowed to, but I want to do it anyway. Can I get a variance for that? And the answer to that question is a resounding no. The purpose of a variance is not to get people more than what it is that they're allowed to get. It's to basically solve for a difficult lot. Basically, if you can't get what your neighbors can get because of the shape of your lot, then you are a good candidate for a variance. For example, if you look at these upper two lots, right, these might be the standard size houses that you can get in this area, right? You have your setback, and according to the rules and the code, if you set back exactly what they say, you can get what your neighbors get if you were to start from scratch. But if you look at this lot, it doesn't really work that way, because you might have to set back by that X factor right there, and you just simply can't do it. So that's a good candidate for a variance. And same thing with this triangular lot on the bottom here, and you can see that that's exactly what happens in a good portion of Torrance, and lots of areas where they have regular lots for the most part, and then a few irregular lots. So I can tell you with very good certainty that both of these have gotten variances and achieved them. All right, I have another question here. How Wild West is the ADU process in South Bay cities? Do you design them? Yes, we do design them. It was Wild West, but now they're starting to really kind of figure out what it is that they can and can't do. Some cities are still in violation of the California law, and they're going to get sued, and that's how that's going to get resolved. But some, most cities have slowly kind of figured out what it is that they're going to do in order to allow these accessory dwelling units, in order to allow these second units on these properties. And the rules are a bit more straightforward than they were before. Some are just defaulting to the California rule, and they're saying, you know, they're basically saying, you know, whatever the California rule says, we're going to go ahead and do the bare minimum. Like Lawndale, they really are not happy that ADUs are allowed in their city, and they fight them as best as they can. Anytime there's a gray area interpretation, they pick the more strict one. And then, you know, like LA City, for example, is very open, and they're very, you know, anytime there's a gray area, they usually default to allowing it. So it was Wild West. It still is a little, they're still kind of figuring it out. But if you want to do an ADU, there are now procedures and there are ways to make it happen. COVID-19 has made it difficult. We're actually doing an ADU that was supposed to be an over-the-counter process, and it has turned out not to be an over-the-counter process. And it's taken a month and a half because things that should take a week are taking a lot longer now. Okay, let's see. All right, so site analysis real quick. You know, imagine you're in North Redondo and you want to know how much square footage you can put. We helped a client with this particular site analysis. Basically, we take all the boundaries, we figure out, you know, what your driveway might look like. No real design, but we show you what the best and highest use for that particular piece of property would be. If you wanted to put a duplex on this lot, maybe you might be able to get your 2,500 square feet. We would put all of that down for you so you can kind of see that. This is what a real pre-design analysis looks like when we're analyzing what can be done for, let's say, an apartment complex. So it has a bunch of detail on exactly what you can and can't do, what the heights are, what your maximum square footage is going to be, and that would help an investor figure out whether they should do a development or not. Should I do a basement, right? Should I do a basement? Now the question is, how much is it going to cost, right? If kind of starting is $350 per foot in a particular area for construction, as soon as you go down, you can see that it increases dramatically the further you go down per square foot, and it's exponential as well. So keep that in mind. This is why for this 3-story house that we designed, we put no basement, because, you know, this was for a developer and they didn't want to spend the money, understandably, and so we fit what we could fit on this lot. I am now going to stop and reshare something real quick for you guys here. All right, so this is what we use for presentation and also to show people what they can and can't do. This is a more developed design. This is not pre-design, this is schematic design. But you can see over here, these boxes might be something that we might do during pre-design in order to figure out what you can and can't do. This is kind of a more developed thing that we did. This is a home in Manhattan Beach that we designed for a client. They were very into butterfly roofs, and this might be the first of its kind around this area here. You know, one of the things that is an important thing for us to do during pre-design is kind of show people what, to kind of show people how they're going to be impacted by lots of different things, right? So the first thing that you see is kind of on this top level here, you can kind of see that you have, you can see your view straight away, right? So this is the actual view on this level that you're going to see as you're looking outside of this house. And we do that using drone technology, kind of getting it up at that precise eye level. And that helps people figure out, again, do I want to buy this property or not? Am I going to get enough view? Am I going to see enough water in order to warrant doing a development on this lot? Something else to consider is, what are your neighbors going to be looking at, right? So, you know, are you going to be up above your neighbors? Are you going to be the one looking into their house, or are they going to be the ones looking into your house? And you want to be the decider of that. So we actually, you know, we will actually potentially put, you know, the neighbors' homes in the model in order to see what you can see. And even if you're not looking at a view, even if you are just kind of enjoying your butterfly roof and looking out towards a non-view area, what are you going to be looking at? right? How are you going to be framing your view with anything in particular? So things like that are things that we want to kind of keep in mind, and things that you can do during pre-design. All right, 3 questions here, and Nikki, let me know if I'm doing okay on time. But
yes, you're good.
Okay, great. So I have from Sandy, I heard California Coastal Commission recently advised Hermosa Beach no more basement approvals west of PCH. Is that true? That is interesting. I did not hear that one, but that's definitely something that I will be looking into. Sandy, if you send me an email, I would be more than happy to answer that question for you, because I definitely, if that is a thing, I definitely want to know about that myself. So basement approvals in Hermosa. Great, I will definitely write that down. One of the things that's happening in Hermosa Beach, which is kind of interesting, is, I'm sure you guys are aware of this California rule that says that you cannot reduce units on a piece of property. It's simply not allowed anymore. If you have a 2-unit on one lot, you want to kind of rebuild that, you cannot reduce units. And that's actually something that has been kind of contentious with the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission didn't want you to reduce units for years and years, but California finally just made it a law. And so Hermosa was fighting against that. They were basically saying, we only allow single family residences. So if you demolish this building, this 2-unit building, you can only build a single family residence back. And they were saying that for a long time. So the Coastal Commission and the city were actually fighting with one another. And essentially it led to stalemates where theoretically, if you demolished a 2-unit in Hermosa, you simply couldn't build anything back. So that went to court for a long time. Hermosa has now completely released on that, and they are allowing 2 units on single family because of this California law that forbids you from a reduction in units. And in fact, in this particular one, this was 2 on a lot, right? And so in order to take care of that, we built an accessory dwelling unit down below, which can only be accessed from the exterior. Fortunately, these clients did want that, but there is no way around that anymore. If you have 2 units on a lot, that's it. You cannot reduce. All right, so let's see. So then we have from Jonathan Nichols. Hello. We have on the maximum square foot on the maximum square footage. Isn't there a maximum based on the size of a lot? What's that square footage determination ratio? So maximum square footage is different. It just kind of depends on what city you're looking at and what overlay. It all varies from location to location a great deal. In fact, I try not to remember any of them because there's so many different factors that play into your square footage that, I mean, sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's simply 40% of the lot size, right? But sometimes it's more complicated than that. And so it's so easy to look up that I just look it up for every lot that we ever kind of figure it out for. And, like certain areas of Manhattan Beach, it's fairly straightforward. It is a based on your setbacks and your height limit, and how much open space is required, meaning how much exterior space is required to be up to the sky. So they don't actually have a square footage limit. They have other ways that ultimately determine how much square footage you can put on that lot. I hope I answered your question. Nick Peters, are you open to letting us have a copy of your presentation? Absolutely. I will send it to Nikki as a PDF, and I'm sure if Nikki wouldn't mind sending that out to everyone, then I'd be happy to do that. We have David. How deep are the foundations typically in very sandy areas like Hermosa Beach on the Strand? No caissons needed. Typically, no caissons are needed in Hermosa Beach on the Strand. Typically, you can get away with somewhat shallow foundations because you're on sand, right? So you're on sand, and so that's a pretty good medium for having a foundation. One of the concerns, though, in these beach areas that you don't have in areas where you have other soil areas, like soil issues like PV, is shoring, right? So you just want to make sure that your neighbors don't collapse on you as you're digging straight down. And so one of the requirements is sometimes, 100,000, 200,000, sometimes more in shoring to prevent your neighbors from collapsing in on you as you're digging down into the earth. It's an expensive and time-consuming process, and a lot of times it takes a long time just to get out of the ground before you start framing the house. Sonia, we have, when do you start needing a 3-car garage? Is it after a certain amount of square footage? It depends on where you are. In Rolling Hills, behind the gates, there is definitely a threshold where you need a 3-car garage. In a lot of these other cities, it's simply 2-car, and it doesn't matter what you do. It's 2-car. You can do more, but it's only 2-car that's necessary. The answer is it depends, and it depends on your lot size, where you are, what overlay you're in. So I wish I could give you a cure-all answer for that, but it's all different. So it looks like that is all the questions I have here. Does anyone have any more questions that they would like to ask me while I'm sitting here? It doesn't look like there are. So I will say thank you all. Oh, you know what? I do have one more question here. It looks like a few more questions just rolled in. All right. Construction costs, a range. That is a great question. So I mean, if you're looking at a house like this is probably going to be in like the $500–600 per square foot range, and it's because you have these wide open spaces. You have these kind of you have all this glass that's everywhere, so that requires a lot of structure. These types of doors out here are not inexpensive, having doors that kind of slide away and disappear. Also this one has a partial basement, so $500–600 per foot. We did another one on Hermosa that was $800 a foot. But starting, if you're looking for kind of starting house, a stucco box starts you right now in the beach areas at around $400 a foot. So prices have definitely gone up and are continuing to rise. You can do tract housing still for $250 a foot, but you need to get scale. We're doing the one on Rocky Point that I told you about is $1,200 a foot. So it's kind of all over the board. But I can usually tell through if someone has an inspiration image of what it is that they're looking for and what city they're in and what location. I can usually give a good idea of what construction costs might be for what it is that they're looking for. And then David, is RPV still trying to prevent ADUs? Yes, they are, although they are failing miserably. So they cannot prevent ADUs. It is inevitable, and they have to allow them. They do have new proposed rules at the city council level right now, but nothing has been approved as far as I know. I haven't checked for probably a good 2 months. So maybe something's changed, but if you want to get an ADU done in RPV, they have to allow it, and they have to make it quick, or they will eventually get sued, and they will have to kind of figure this out. So, so that is that. All right, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you having me. If you have any questions, any follow-up questions, feel free to email or call me. I'm available anytime for you guys. Love to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye-bye.